Well, good morning and welcome to chapel. We are so glad that you are here this morning. And obviously our format is just a little bit different than normal, and I'll be explaining that in just a few minutes. But very quickly, before we get too far down the road, I want to tell you about a church that changed everything for me. In 1994, I was a new believer. I was on a new journey, and I needed a new start. And so I moved to a city called Charlottesville, Virginia. And I got that start there at a church called Covenant Church. And that became my home church. It's where I met my wife. It's where I became, really understood what it meant to be a disciple. And so Covenant has a very important place in my life. I still call it my home church. And we love to visit there whenever we can. But under the leadership of Dr. Harold and Layla Baer, I grew in faith. And I grew to understand more fully what diversity was and the magnitude and the value of diversity in the eyes of God and in the eyes of His kingdom. And so that's kind of a little bit what we're going to be talking about today. But it was at Covenant where I had my first significant relationship with a person of another color. It was at Covenant that I found my first mentor of a different ethnicity. It was at Covenant that I had my first missionary exposure and my first missions trip. And so this church has played a huge role in my passion and my heart in exploring and talking about, living out, preaching, teaching, and doing everything that we can to understand this idea of diversity. And there's no question in my mind that today, one of the significant issues facing our church and facing our life as believers in Jesus Christ is this idea of racial tension, racial issue, this concept of diversity that the Bible talks about very explicitly. I want to share a quote, and I think appropriately, from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he said this: "The early Christians rejoiced when they were deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and the principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society." And I think many times that we forget the power of the church to do just that. We are the thermostat that sets the temperature for the rest of society. And when it comes to topics like racial issues where there's so much sensitivity and tension involved, we have to remember that as believers in Jesus Christ, we are the ones who set the temperature. We are the ones who are supposed to be leading the conversations. We are the ones who are supposed to be setting the tone for the rest of the world and really understanding what it means to love our neighbor. So today is not so much about Covenant Church, though we're going to be talking a lot about Covenant because that's the model, that's the example that we're going to be kind of pulling from. It's not so much about their journey, but really it's about the global and local impact that we all can have when we value and we intentionally foster a culture of racial and ethnic diversity in our churches, in our communities, and in our lives. And so this really begins and kicks off a series that we're calling Real Life at Lee. And so over the next semester, over the next couple semesters, we're going to be sharing different ideas on different issues that are facing us every single day here at Lee University. And so we're kicking off this series talking about one of the most important issues that we can, and that's racial issues, that's diversity. And so in this series, we're going to explore all kinds of different ideas. And Real Life at Lee, I think, is going to help us sort of frame give us the framework that we need to begin to put together the pieces, the tools that we need to actually successfully deal with some of those difficult topics. But to do that, today we've asked Dr. Harold Baer to join us, and he and his wife Layla have pastored Covenant for 38 years, which is a feat in and of itself. We could have him talk for a long time about longevity just in pastoral ministry alone. But Dr. Baer is a graduate of Lee University. He's also a graduate of William and Mary University, and he earned his PhD from the University of Virginia. His research, writing, and teaching on mental health, criminal psychology, and religion and urbanization have literally taken him around the world. He has served on the board of directors for the Pentecostal Theological Seminary for 23 years and has been appointed to special executive committees in the Church of God to address some of the most important and sensitive issues facing our denomination. He's the author of several books, including 3 crime mystery novels. But it was in 2017 when Dr. Baer and Covenant Church would be thrust into the national spotlight as community leaders in the healing and the reconciliation of racial relations after the race riots that exploded into the streets of Charlottesville. The lone fatality of that event, a young lady, often attended Covenant Church, and she would often say that she loves that church because of its diversity. And Pastor Baer was honored to speak to the entire nation across multiple networks in the days that followed and at the funeral. And he still continues to be a leading voice in the community of Charlottesville and the rest of the state of Virginia on issues concerning race and diversity, especially in the faith community. In the 25 years that I have known him as a pastor, as a mentor, and yes, my father-in-law, I can assure you he is authentically a pastor's pastor with a heart for people that literally reaches around the globe. So would you please help me in welcoming Dr. Harold Baer to the platform. So, Dr. Baer, thank you for being here. Pastor Baer, father-in-law, we appreciate you coming and joining us today. You brought some special guests with you. Who do you have?
I have Layla with me, my wife, please. I don't know if they can spotlight or not, but she is wearing a similar outfit.
Very similar outfit to that, yeah. So you and Layla are both graduates of Lee University, so you love this school. You've been a part of this school for a long time. I know that you guys have supported much of what happens here, and I know that is a part of your journey. But let's get the obvious question out of the way first. Tell me about the shirt.
The shirt, you will hear things that sometimes are just not true. You'll hear that it's an offense to wear things of other cultures. I have probably dozens of shirts of different countries. All of them have been given to me by people from those countries, and they say, please wear my shirt. So this was a gift to me. I have not purchased one of my shirts of other cultures. They've all been given to me with the promise that I would wear them on a Sunday.
Yeah, and you do that often. This is not something that's like a special event or whatever. Almost any Sunday that you show up at Covenant, you're going to see people dressed like this in their traditional, cultural shirts or whatever they have all the time. And I think that's for me, is one of the demarcating factors of the diversity, the extent of diversity at Covenant Church is from leadership down, people come to celebrate the cultures that they're from. Absolutely. And it's open and it's welcome.
Especially the first Sunday of every month.
Especially the first Sunday of every month. So this is not a gimmick for you. This is literally who you are, and I can say that because I know that. But it's definitely sometimes, I think, for other people, sort of a jolt when they see the senior pastor preaching, from a cultural outfit that is not their own. And so I think that's an important sort of statement that you guys are making. So Covenant Church, 1981, you and Layla go there with a young family as pastors. Weren't intending to be the senior pastors of Covenant Church. What did it look like in 1981?
60 people, WASP as you can spell it. I mean, all white, totally.
Right. Now, WASP is a term that probably a lot of us may not know. So what does that mean?
White Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right? So,
good sociological term.
Good sociological term. That's right. That's right. But it didn't look like it looks today, that's for sure. Now, today, Covenant looks much different. And if you were to go to Covenant today, you would experience a much different sort of feeling and atmosphere. So today, how many nationalities, how many languages, what does Covenant look like on a typical Sunday today?
Well, on a typical Sunday morning, we think, more than 20 nations. And it's just very blended, probably much like you are here today. They just come in and separate families, even separate as they come in the door, sitting all over. We'll talk about that a little more later.
A little bit later, yeah.
So there were about 60 people for worship. We're right.
When you got there in 81. And today, I mean, the numbers don't matter, but it's a thriving, growing church in a wonderful community. We did just very briefly mention sort of the race riots in 2017. And I think when we had talked about that, number one, we did not want that to be a focus point of this conversation. Number two, the vast majority of the people who were part of that race riot actually weren't from the Charlottesville community. Charlottesville itself is a wonderfully blended, wonderfully ethnic community.
Yeah, we were kind of shaking our heads saying, what's going on here?
What's going on here, yeah. So A very confusing time, I know. You even mentioned going to Walmart just like it was normal on that day, and you wouldn't have known the difference unless you were downtown. So, but that's kind of the context and the framework that Covenant sets in. It's in this wonderfully complex, ethnic, diversified community where there are a lot of different faiths that are being expressed in that community, and there's a lot of different people who are leading the conversations in diversity in that community, especially among the faith culture. So, but we know that journey was not easy. From 1981 to 2018 to where you are today to wearing this, that was not an easy journey. And no. I know having been there, having it be my home church, I understand some of the stories and I know some of the history of that. But along that journey, there were significant moments that really kind of catapulted Covenant into that idea or into that diversified body that it is today. So tell us one of those or a moment where you really felt like that this was a significant moment for Covenant.
Well, let me kind of round that a little bit. First of all, I was a sociology major here, and I fell in love with sociology. Dr. Ollie Lee was my mentor. I pursued that course on through all of my graduate studies. I have to give a shout out to Lee University. Again, all of our children have attended here. Many of our staff members have attended here. And it this place profoundly impacted my life. I think you'll find it interesting to know that I actually left Lee College when it was 850 students and just walked into the College of William & Mary and was enrolled for my graduate studies there without even taking the GRE. And I was the only student of my admissions class that year, to my knowledge, that did not have, on graduate level, that did not have to take remedial courses. All the other students had to take extra courses to come up to the College of William & Mary. I think you ought to give a shout out for Lee.
Yeah, that's good.
All right? Now, let me tell you a story. Falling in love with sociology is a study. Sociology is a study of groups of people. It has many different fingers now, more than in the early days. But let me share something with you that happened. So I'd been there a little while, and there was an event that happened that a person was run over in the night. A homeless person was run over in the night by a car, and it was a tragic accident. I knew that someone, distant kin, attended Covenant Church. That was a different culture, and I said to them, I would like to offer the opportunity for you to have the funeral at Covenant Church. They said, really, Pastor Baer? Really? Because that just had not been done up to that point in time. I said, absolutely. And I said, they said, they can't afford it. I said, there's no charge, please. I said, and so they went and talked to the family, and they came back and they said, well, they said if you're going to do that, they want you to do the funeral. I said, okay, but that's conditional. If they're going to do that, I've got a contract of my own. If I'm going to do the funeral, I know the family's in need. And so I said, I want to be part of everything. I want to help with the funeral home, everything, so we can keep costs down. They went back, they said, okay. So probably for the first time in the history of Charlottesville, a white pastor goes to a black funeral home, and I literally pick out the coffin, I negotiate the price, I negotiate with everything about the funeral, and the family accepts what I do. And then we had a problem with the cemetery because how we're going to do that. So what transpired at that juncture is that I called a contractor and I said, can you dig the grave? He said, Pastor, he said, I'll dig the grave and not charge you, but I can't stay there and wait to fill it in. I said, that's fine. That's okay. You do your part. We'll work the rest of it. So we did the funeral, and it was packed house, packed out. And I said, okay. So we get to the country at a black cemetery, and it was a very dignified thing. Now, there's something you must know sociologically. Black funerals are not white funerals. White funerals, people show up however, dressed however. Black funerals, people dress up. I mean, high heels, the works, men in suits. It is community time at a black funeral. So we've done the service at the graveside, and I say to the ladies, if you will, please, if you go back up to the churchyard, I said, gentlemen, please stand by. And I backed my car up to the grave, literally, right 6 feet away, popped the remote control, and my trunk was full of shovels. And I got out, took my necktie off, took my top coat, my suit coat off, and loosened the top button of my shirt. and I passed out shovels to the men, and I said, gentlemen, couldn't get the guy to stop and stay and fill in the grave, and we've got to do the work. And so I passed out shovels, took my shovel, and we filled in the grave on a July day, 100 degrees straight up, hot as blazes. I mean, we were soaking wet. Day done, shovels back in the car, I drove away. I just thought, okay, it's what Jesus would do. I mean, after all, he's the greatest sociologist. Before I got back to town, phones were ringing, and people were saying, what in the world is going on? And that was a pivotal moment, Chaplain. It was pivotal. People saw that we cared.
Yeah. It was a significant moment for you in terms of building relationships.
Absolutely.
Into a community and a culture that had typically, in Virginia we're talking about, right? So they'd typically been isolated and segregated from each other. There was not much cross-cultural relationship happening among the churches.
No, and now it is not uncommon for white folks to have their funerals done at the black funeral home that the director is now my personal friend.
Right.
Because we cut thousands of dollars off the bill.
Right, and that's because Covenant sort of paved the way, sort of did the hard work, the shoveling, if you will, to make that relationship possible. Well, we've talked a lot about this issue of race, and I know that's something, especially this week as we honor Dr. King and the work that he has done in paving that way. But there's no way that we could really cover a full breadth of conversation on racial issues and racial tensions and diversity. And so one of the things that Pastor Baer has done is he's kind of given us 7 maxims that we're going to be talking about, we're going to be sharing with you to kind of help build a culture of diversity in your community, in your churches, and in your life, your personal life, because at the end of the day, we have to own this conversation. There comes a point where you individually have to understand the fundamental preaching and teaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we own the conversation on diversity. We own the conversation on racial tension. That belongs to us. And so we're going to share these 7 maxims with you because the cause and the cure are already known. We don't need to talk about the cause of racism, where you know that that's sin in the human life. And we don't need to talk about the cure of racism because we know that's love that comes through us because of Jesus Christ to the rest of the world. So those 2 bookends are already there. Everything in the middle is the hard work that we have to do to make that happen. So these maxims, I think, are going to help us sort of frame that conversation. So here's the first maxim that you share with me. You do not have to be like people to like people. Talk about it.
Yeah, I live by stories. If you were a parishioner at Covenant Church, you'll hear stories. So let me tell you about Tiny. Tiny was my friend who was a backhoe operator, and he was huge, guys.
But his name was Tiny.
He was
Makes
a
sense.
huge man, but he was a great backhoe operator, and I would literally go to construction sites just to watch him operate a backhoe. And so one day I'm out, I know where he's working, and it's hot and dusty, and I drive my car right up through the construction site, right up beside the backhoe, and have to wait for the dust to settle down. And he's sitting up there, and he shuts the machine down, and he looks at me, and he spits tobacco, and he says, "Preacher, you get your car dirty." I said, "Tiny, you're worth it." He said, "Well, now," he said. And I said, "Hey, Tiny, I got a question. I'd like you to do something." He said, "What's that, preacher?" I said, "Come to church Sunday." He said, "Well, now," and he spit tobacco. And I said, "I know what you're thinking." He said, "You do?" I said, "Yep, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you wouldn't be welcome." "Well, now," he said, "it did occur to me." Some more tobacco juice flew. And I said, I'll tell you what, Tiny. I said, "I'll tell you what, let's do. You come Sunday, and when you get to the church doors, if they will not let you come in, you just write a little note or something and have them bring it to me and give me time to resign. And I'll walk out with you, and I'll never preach another sermon in this church." He said, "You would do that?" I said, "You are my friend."
Yeah. And I think, that's such a great story, and I love that story.
I told the congregation Sunday morning what I had done.
Yeah. They weren't as excited, were they? But you don't have to be like people.
Well, I'm
to
still
like people.
pastor
You're
there.
still 38 years, right? So,
I survived some of them.
I think they've actually asked for your resignation a couple times.
No, they voted before I came, and I've never let them vote again.
That's right.
I got 100% that time.
That's a whole different conversation. I think the bottom line is, though, obviously, you don't have to be like people to like people.
That's right.
And I think, what that story about Tiny just frames it for us is such a great indicator that, our job is to literally go to the least of these, to the poor, to those who don't look like us, think like us, smell like us, or act like us.
That's right.
And be the hands and feet of Christ. And, I think we overcomplicate how we reach people for Jesus. You just simply take care of them. You be their friend. You love on them. So you don't have to be like people.
If you don't love people, just chalk it up. You're done.
You're done.
It's all over.
Okay, the second maxim that we're going to talk about here in just a second is live bigger than your own culture. Live bigger than your own culture. What does that mean?
Well, being a sociologist, I love cultures. Mm-hmm. And what you have to do is actually constantly find people. One of the things so our new music minister at Covenant Church is from the Ivory Coast. She's the first person in our church from the Ivory Coast. So one of the first things we must do is make sure that flag from her country is hanging on the wall of our church. Second, I will ask her to cook a meal, she and her husband, who is a plastic surgeon at the University of Virginia. I will ask them to cook a meal native to their culture. Leave out the hot stuff, and you have to keep repeating that.
You can't handle the spice.
Because I can't handle the spices, okay? And invite us over. After we eat, then I say to them, look, I need to ask you to do this. First of all, tell me what it is about your culture that I could do. What can I do that would offend your people? Because there are mannerisms, there are figures of speech in every culture that are offensive. And then I say, now tell me about your culture. If you bring other people to church from your culture, what can I do to make them like me? I want them to like me. And I'm wanting you to teach me. Now tell me about your culture. Are there things I should avoid? Are there things I should not talk about?
Right.
So I'm now going outside my culture, becoming uncomfortable. And I can share with you, Chaplain, the only time I ever wept during this time was when I met with a group of African Americans, and they broke my heart. And I realized how ignorant I was of things they'd experienced.
Right. Yeah. Live bigger than your own culture.
You have to stretch yourself and be willing.
I think the indicator there that I picked up from that is, you sort of invited yourself in. But the point is you have to step into other people's pain, other people's reality, other people's context in order to really gain an understanding of who they are and where they're coming from.
You have to give them a chance to write on the page of your life.
Yeah.
You have to invite them. They won't do it otherwise because, here's the PhD pastor,
Right.
here's the author,
Right.
the community leader, and they're not going to come through that door unless you open that door.
Right. Yeah, I like the fact that you say invite me over. I'm going to start doing that. Invite me over to your house for dinner. So that's a good idea.
Well, it's a free meal.
It's a free meal,
helps
right?
with the budget.
Not spicy though. All right, number 3, and we're gonna push a little bit here. Number 3, missions is the DNA of our faith, not a weekend event. Not a weekend event. I think at Covenant, man, if there's a church that loves missions, and I know you guys have a conference every year. You support missionaries literally around the world. I have Dana grew up with missionaries in her home. I mean,
right.
This is a part of our DNA of our faith, not just a weekend event. So I think it kind of guide us through sort of that concept or that idea.
Well, you got to have a constant stream of missionaries. You got to have constant missionary stories. You got to have. We do an annual missions conference. I don't know of many churches. We'll have 350 to 400 people at our missions banquet in March.
Right.
And we have international foods. Everybody cooks internationally. So you go around the world in one night. Everybody be dressed in different, their clothes from different cultures. So you celebrate the world. You celebrate the body of Christ.
Right. In 1981, that wasn't the case.
No.
It wasn't that they were, cold-hearted or whatever. It was just they had not been taught or trained
Right.
or led to go in that direction. I think from a leadership perspective, that's something we need to pay attention to, is that we, again, as leaders, we set the tone, right? We get to lead the charge, and we do that delicately, but we do that very intentionally. And I think certainly for Covenant, missions has been exhibited, as the DNA of our faith and part of the identity of that church. And so I think it's important to note that, again, missions is not just some weekend experience that we do just for the fun of it. It's a part of who we are in our faith. Number 4, educate yourself about those around you. Educate yourself about those around you.
Well, I'm just going to be brief about that because of time, and to simply say you have to be a constant learner, lifelong learner. And so, this is the point, students out there. I'm 42 years into being a pastor, senior pastor, and I changed my whole style of preaching 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So you have to be willing to learn. I typically, after first service on Sunday morning, pastor or chaplain, we have 2 English services and 5 ethnic services on a Sunday. Mm-hmm. So the 5 ethnic services: Swahili, Nepalese, Burmese, Hindi, and Swahili, Burmese, Hispanic. Those 5 services have their own pastor that I'm over them. But after the first English service, I usually find some astute person that I trust and respect and say, tell me how I improve my message for the second service.
Right.
You've got to be sensitive to people and be a learner. And so missions has to be woven into that as a fabric and with diversity. And I've had people from different cultures come up to me after first service and say, I wouldn't say that second service if I was you.
Yeah, we know stories that we can't share here.
Yeah, right.
You've said some things from the pulpit, and somebody else came and said, no, you can't say that.
No, they'd be laughing until time was over if I would tell them one of them.
Exactly, absolutely. But educate yourself about those around you. I mean, I think it's our diligence and our responsibility to take ownership of learning about the cultures that surround us and educating ourselves about the people who are either in our dorms or in our apartments or in our homes or whatever. And so that's on us. And number 5, treat people equally without regard.
That means, the truth of the matter is you must see poor people. That's what that means. It's not hard to see the rich people. It's not hard to see the people of status. But if you start in Genesis and go through Revelation, you're going to find that God's challenge is for us to see the poor. Mm-hmm. And so we work hard at that. We in no way at Covenant Church ever promote people just because they have money. So you may find the ushers coming down the aisle, and one may be a refugee that arrived here with a knapsack on their back and nothing else 6 months ago or a year ago, and beside them may be a millionaire or a doctor from a university or a professor or an engineer. But we make no distinction.
Right.
We never point out things that elevate people by social structure or social status.
And I think yesterday when we were talking about this, you made a really keen point. This which leads us to the next one, and that's integrate diversity into your leadership, culture, and discipleship process. And the reason why that's important is because a lot of these folks that you get are as refugees or they're coming from another country. In their home country, they're attorneys, they're doctors, they're educators, engineers, and they're brilliant minds, but for some reason or another, in the States, their credentials don't transfer.
They're English.
And so folks who are working at the University of Virginia Hospital who are janitors here, but in their home country, medical doctors, and they're working towards getting their American credentials.
They're working at $8 an hour.
Right.
As a medical doctor, cleaning a restroom at the University of Virginia.
Right. And so treating people equally without regard.
By the way, they won't tell you that if you don't ask.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
They won't tell you if you don't
ask.
ask.
Yeah.
You have to go in search and say, well, now tell me about your life in your native country.
Right. But treating people equally without regard rolls into integrate diversity into your leadership, culture, and discipleship process.
Quickly move them into leadership.
Quickly move them in because they're capable. They're willing and they're capable. And I know Covenant, and I know you have ex-cons murderers who are leading classes in discipleship at Covenant Church. You have refugees who are leading ministries. You have all kinds of people across the spectrum, poor, different ethnicities.
They're saved, though.
But they are saved, right? Which is a great place to start. Not always required. I mean, that's debatable, but no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, they are at least saved. That's good. but they're leading in amazing ways. And these are people that we would probably overlook just at face value.
Well, let's think about it. Like if you come from a different country, let's say from Uzbekistan,
right,
and you know there are other people from Uzbekistan in the community, but you're a Christian and you come and you like it, and you say and you feel welcome. That's huge. And then you bring a friend, but if you finally have 10 Uzbekistanese or whatever you want to call them, sitting on a row, and nobody ever gets up out of that row, nobody ever ushers, nobody ever greets. They don't think they're not welcome.
Mm-hmm.
But when one of them gets up and becomes an usher or a greeter, then they say, "Oh,
right,
we're people here."
We're people here, yeah. And I think that kind of really speaks to the heart of what we talked about for this conversation, and that was bringing dignity to diversity. And I think it starts with human dignity. The ability to love people where they are, how they are, and see them as Christ genuinely sees them, to dig deep into their messiness and their stories and their lives and really pull out the gifts that God has given them. Because if they're saved, we're all given a spiritual gift, right? We're all given that opportunity to serve in the kingdom. And it's our job to find it, right?
Yeah, that's the Holy Spirit's responsibility to equip the church.
Right.
And he does do that. I don't know how much time we have left here, Chaplain.
About 10 minutes.
So good.
I don't like you calling me chaplain either. It feels awkward. You call me Pastor Rob or whatever.
Call me. Well,
There's 25 years of history here. We've been through this. We've talked about this.
Well, basically, I just keep calling to make sure that you're taking care of my daughter.
I am. It's true. It's true. It's true.
By the way, I don't want her back.
Well, you're not getting her back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Thank you. I'll give you money for lunch.
That's awkward.
Just keep her.
Wow. We'll be seeing a family therapist after this. Okay, so number seven. This I don't know if I can recover. Number 7. This doesn't happen easily. And never measure yourself by your losses. Now, every story about Covenant's journey into diversity and through diversity is not a good one. There's been some bumps along the way, right? So talk to us about never measuring yourself by your losses.
I was trying to think who was the great basketball star that he said people talk about how many three-pointers I have shot, but they don't see the thousands or tens of thousands I missed. And some of you will know who that was.
It's probably Steph Curry.
But it was a comment that lodged in my mind because as a pastor, certainly being in the same church for 37, in my 38th year, you will make mistakes. Just flat out, you will make mistakes. But in the course of things, you have to decide whether or not you can accept that mistake and move on. And you have to decide whether or not, people will disappoint you. And so one of the things that I try and teach and share with pastors, and Layla and I do ministry tours working with pastors, is we say, don't burn your bridges. I'm sitting in Rob's office this morning, my phone rings, and I'm dealing with a potential suicide in our city of someone who does not attend Covenant Church. Someone who does not attend Covenant Church is calling me about someone else that does not attend Covenant Church, but I'm a community leader. But that someone who called me is someone that I have kept a bridge over, even in difficult times through the years, to where they feel free to call. So you say, don't burn bridges. Don't ever burn bridges. You've got to keep yourself open to the future and count your wins. You count the times you win. And anywhere you like, anytime you want, call me. 434-953-9065. I give my number out from the pulpit. And I say, I will tell you victory stories. I will tell you of lives changed. I will tell you about 2 of the hardest criminals in our jail of 500 people in our county. And a jailer comes to church and says, I just came to see what kind of church could redeem the 2 meanest men we've ever had in our jail. And both of them became preachers. One of them now is extremely wealthy. I think he's a deacon in a church now. The other one is still an ordained minister. So you must count your wins. And this is good for you. Not all of you will be pastors. Hopefully all of you will be wonderful church members. But count your wins. Celebrate them. Celebrate them. Thank God for them. And when you're in trouble, do what I do. I go back to my greatest mentor of sociology, and that's Jesus Christ. And I say, Lord, how would you have done this? And remember, when he went to the woman at the well, he went outside of his culture. When he went to the Roman soldier, he went outside of his culture. He did radical, revolutionary things that people were they were amazed. And they were astonished. In fact, they were shocked. The disciples were shocked that he would talk with a Samaritan woman that they knew was a woman of ill repute.
Right.
So celebrate your wins.
Celebrate your wins. And I think what culture would tell us, the larger culture in general, is if you mess up once, you're out. It seems to be the running narrative that, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes in this journey towards diversity. We're going to say things sometimes that we shouldn't say. We're going to express ourselves sometimes the way we shouldn't express ourselves or whatever. But the point is that we never quit. We never give up on loving God's people, all of God's people, no matter their color, no matter where they come from, no matter their station in life. And I think that's the wins that we count on, and that's what we bank on. Because at the end of the day, I think that's ultimately what Jesus is going to define us by.
And it's a journey. Right? It's a journey, Rob. It's not just a day or two. It's the journey that stacks up.
Right.
Yeah, 37 years done and into the 38th year. I look at this on the side of my head, and I marvel that Covenant Church is growing. Yeah. I say, don't they see that I'm a grandfather? Don't they understand? But instead, there's a fresh energy. Someone the other day said, Pastor, it's getting energized. We're recruiting new leaders. So it takes time to build a foundation that's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about people believing you love them.
Right.
Can I just take a quick moment?
Sure.
A person comes to church and he sits right in front of the pulpit in a wheelchair, and he has never walked in 58 years. He has to be helped into his wheelchair. And Sunday morning after church, he said to me, Pastor, can I say a word to you? And he stretches out his hand, it's not straight, and his fingers are crooked, and he reaches out, and I realize he wants to shake hands, and I shake his hand, and he said, can I tell you I've been to churches that nobody would shake my hand? He said, I love this church, Pastor. It's having a heart for people
right.
that think they're nobody.
Right.
And have been treated like they're nobody.
Like nobody. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So closing thought here as we kind of wrap up this conversation. We talked a little bit yesterday about love covering a multitude of sins, kind of what we were just discussing. And you'd said that people will forgive you if they know that you love them. That's sort of the running thing there. So you're speaking to a couple thousand, and some online, who knows how many are watching online, but you're speaking to a couple thousand current next generation leaders right here today. And so maybe what's a final closing thought that you have as we ourselves work through what it means to love other people that don't look like us, maybe don't smell like us, don't come from where we come from.
Well,
final thought.
I wish I had longer to share with you, but let me say what I would say to the congregation occasionally at Covenant Church. And trying to help them understand in life, I want you just to imagine that right now, I would just grab my head, and my eyes would just bulge, and my face would turn flaming red, as it were. And Rob would realize that someone on he'd say, what's happening? What's happening? I said, I don't know, I've got a pain in my head. And so you rush me out while you're sitting here, you put me in an ambulance, they rush me to Erlanger in Chattanooga, and they tell me that I've got a brain tumor and that I have to have immediate surgery. And I say, who is the best brain surgeon that can get here? And they say, well, thus and so. I said, bring him in. And they bring him in, and it's a Chinese lady. And I said, ain't no way a Chinese lady's going to operate on me. She's the best. Oh, I don't want her. By the way, you need a quart of blood or you need a pint of blood in the next hour, you're going to die. What color is the person that's coming from? Have you ever heard of it? I've been in the hospital. I've been with many people dying. I've been in many crises. I've never heard anybody ever say, what color was the person the blood came from? Because it's life-giving blood.
Yeah. It's life-giving. We're created to give each other life. And I think what you said yesterday is because we are family. And I think at the end of the day, that's the narrative that has to be told. No matter what your color, no matter what the tension, no matter what where you come from, at the end of the day, we're created to give each other life because God created us to be a family.
And it's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Makes life so full. I feel so rich.
Yeah.
To have so many friends of so many different cultures.
So many different cultures. In just a few minutes, well, actually now I think the band is going to come and we're going to sing a song. And we kind of wanted to close out today with this worship song. And there's a part of the song where it says, chains fall, fear bow, hear now, Jesus, Jesus, you change everything. Lives healed, hope found, here now, Jesus, you change everything. And as we close out today, I want this to be the final thought that you have. When it comes to issues of racism and racial tension, no politician or policy, and I'm not saying this in a slam derogatory kind of way, but no politician or policy are ever going to solve or heal racial hurt. Jesus changes everything. Changes everything. He changes everything for you. He changes everything for me. He changes the way we see other people. He changes the way we love other people. That's right. If you allow him. And so as we sing this song today, I want this to be the resonating volume of your heart. Here now, lives are changed. And I pray that today as we close out, that you will allow Jesus to change everything about how you see other people. Let's worship.